Now I'm going to bring Tim Furness in just to watch this moment when the explosion takes place. We'll play it back again, just once again, in a moment in slow motion. But here we are about 50 seconds into the flight now, but just at the moment before the solid rocket boosters, Tim
At this
Furness.
point, the engines are being throttled back up again. They had previously been throttled down, and the engines were throttled back up again, and the explosion occurred soon after that. But it didn't seem as though there was any problem with the main engines of the shuttle themselves, but possibly a fuel leakage of some kind from a fuel line on the external tank, which was made worse by possibly a malfunction of the solid rocket booster, which is on the left-hand side. It didn't seem as though it was firing correctly to start with.
Now we're in slow motion, Tim, if you can just take us through it.
The solid rocket booster on the left-hand side doesn't look as though it's firing very cleanly, and it could be that there was a malfunction in that which perhaps ruptured the external tank, or there was a leakage of fuel around the external tank which was ignited by the solid rocket booster. The problem here, you'll see the explosion in a second, the main explosion happens in almost the centre of the external tank, underneath the belly of the shuttle, just there. And that is where there is a fuel line down into the main engines of the shuttle. Now, the problem is that people have suggested, I've heard on the American television, that the solid rocket boosters, or the solid rocket booster on the left-hand side was at fault. But if you continue looking at this film, you'll see that both solid rocket boosters appear to be continue to fire, the one on the right-hand side and the one on the left. The one on the right-hand side.
Red external fuel tank and powering the whole equipment, 2 solid rocket boosters. The boosters are supposed to be jettisoned 2 minutes in.
And that seems to be perfectly all right. The one on the left, which people say might have malfunctioned, seemed to me to be firing all right afterwards. And they seem to be going off at different angles and firing perfectly all right. So it could be a partial solid rocket booster fault which ruptured the fuel tank, or perhaps a rupture in the fuel line down into the main engines. But I don't think there was a problem with the main engines themselves.
Now, Tim, is there any way anybody could have survived that horrific fireball there?
Well, that tank is just one great big pack of dynamite, and there is just no way anybody could survive that. It just would have broken up the whole vehicle.
Tim Furness, incidentally, is a spaceflight journalist. I'm also joined by David Wilson, who was the BBC's science correspondent till very recently, and also by Dr. John Padday, who is a British scientist with Kodak, who is hoping to go up in the shuttle sometime this year. John, just briefly, would you just tell us why you're hoping to go up in the shuttle and whether you're still keen to do it?
Well, an obvious question. First of all, I'm not planning or hoping to fly this year. The state of the art is that Kodak exploring the possibilities of building on some of the fluid physics work that I've already completed in space, and also some of the work that I have been doing with the astronauts in the parabolic flying. This is short duration. Now, what Eastman Kodak are doing is to explore the possibilities of a joint endeavour agreement for flying myself in the shuttle. That is in early stages. There's no flight allocated, there's no joint endeavour agreement at the moment.
John, I think you're 58, are you?
I'm 58.
Will you be one of the oldest astronauts in the business, or will you...
Well, at the moment, I'm not an astronaut. No, I don't know. I'm not out to break records. I'm not particularly interested in records. I'm a scientist, and I'm really only wanting to use this unique environment for a whole series of not shattering breakthroughs, but certainly steps forward that have got to be taken if you want to explore the environment of space in all its forms.
Well, John Padday, let me now drag you back to the tragedy of today and ask you whether that hasn't made you think twice about wanting to go up in a shuttle.
It's not a question. I don't know what has happened today. There are many things that could have happened. Was it, in fact...
well, we'll examine that in a moment in great detail. I'd like the three of you to begin to have another look at that picture. But what about your own thoughts about the shuttle?
All the astronauts will be thinking, how about me? I haven't had time to think. It obviously needs to be thought about. But the realism of this whole tragedy is that it's going to delay the program, the whole shuttle program, and it may well delay it far beyond the time that it is reasonable for me to fly.
David Wilson, let's just look again in a moment at those pictures, and could you tell us what you think might have happened? Then we'll bring Tim in as well. Just in broad terms first, what do you think caused it?
Well,
We're speculating.
one very, it looks to me as though the final thing was that the main external tank ruptured after some fire had damaged it. I'm inclined to think that this all happened just after the whole thing had gone through what they call maximum Q.
Is that the most dangerous moment of the flight?
Well, it's the moment when the physical stressors on the machine are the greatest. And that's why they throttle down, as Tim said, and then throttle back up again when they've gone through it. So it's just after it had gone through the moment of greatest stress, then something goes wrong. Now, that implies, it seems to me, some possible mechanical malfunction, perhaps a fuel line going. The other thing is that I'm interested in is the question of whether one of the solid rocket boosters went wrong. Now, it is worth remembering that at an earlier flight, one of them, in fact, when it was recovered, had, I think, very nearly burnt through its casing. Now, it is just possible that something of that sort could have happened again, and thus set fire in some way to the fuel coming from the big external tank into the shuttle's own engines.
But now, Tim, how likely is a terrifying event of this sort? Are they, I mean, to use a ridiculous phrase, are they dicing with death at every second of these flights? I mean, it is terrifying that a fuel line could sever like that and this whole thing could blow up. How dangerous is this kind of flight? We've come to accept it as quite normal, as commonplace.
Yes, that's right. Well, the space shuttle has certainly demonstrated that getting into space is seemingly routine, but having said that, there have been 25 shuttle flights since 1981, and you compare that with the number of test flights, say, that the Concorde did, or the number of civil aircraft that have been flying. So, I mean, the chances of something going wrong were there, and the astronauts were perfectly prepared to accept that one day something dramatically was going to go wrong. The hope was that there were enough redundancies built into the system to overcome them. On a previous flight, an engine shut down. It didn't really affect the flight too much because redundant systems came in and the shuttle was able to get into orbit.
Right. Let's look at it again in slow motion, and once again, can you take us through it?
Well, there's another point I'd like to raise, actually, with Tim on this. Well,
Yes.
there's the fire, look, you see, round the main external tank. Or
That's
at least it
above
looks
the
like
main
fire.
flame now, the little...
Yes,
Yeah, there are
yes.
two areas of fire there, which could be fuel igniting, and that
there-
is the final moment
Yeah.
where a fuel line seems to have ruptured. That's the fuel line that leads down into the shuttle main engines. It doesn't seem to me, David, that there was any problem with the main engines themselves.
Well, I'm a bit worried about that, as I said to you before. There's a couple of flares which earlier on, much earlier on, 10 or 20 seconds before that, which, well, they could be that the picture had gone out
I
of
thought
focus.
it was going out of focus and back in
It could be
again.
that. I personally have never seen it happen like that before on these pictures, and so I'm a bit dubious as to whether something went wrong there. But that was certainly at the moment, as you're correct to say, when they were throttling down and then throttling up again. That, I think, is very interesting, because there, as you say, is the solid rocket booster going swooshing out the edge, and obviously still firing perfectly satisfactorily.
Yes. It would be interesting to see a little bit later on in the explosion the other
The
solid
other one
rocket
then goes
booster.
off to the left, doesn't
If
it?
they had at that moment been able to get out of the out of the shuttle's cockpit, what at that time were they parachuted down?
They have no parachutes, and they have no means of ejection. They literally, if there was a problem, an impending problem, they could have separated from the stack, which is it's a very unusual thing
Separated
to do. From the whole stack. That's the external tank and the solid rocket boosters.
Right.
It's not an established abort procedure, but in a dire emergency, they'd literally just break away from the whole stack and glide, hopefully, in some sort of control to a sea ditching, or possibly back to the
A
Cape
flash
for
from
landing.
Washington. President Reagan has said that there will be no more no more manned space missions until the cause of the disaster is established. So although he has said that there's no question of cancelling the shuttle program, there will be no more missions until the cause of this thing is established. Will that take a long time?
I don't think it will take very long, and I don't think it necessarily means that the shuttle program is going to be finished for the whole of this year, because there are 4 more orbiters, that's the shuttle main planes, that are scheduled to be flying this year. And if it is found that the problem is a sort of a chance in a million thing, a rupture in a tank or something, then they might say, okay, we can go ahead with the program after maybe about 6 months or so. But if they have discovered an inherent design fault that has suddenly showed up after a number of flights, then obviously they're going to have to redesign the thing and stop the whole program. But the problem is that there are 3 very critical missions this year to do with science probes. One has got to go up on March the 6th to study Halley's Comet. Well, that's questionable whether that's going to happen.
Well, I'm going to talk about that now to Professor Peter Wilmore, who joins us. He's the Professor of Space Research at the University of Birmingham. Professor Wilmore, can you tell us what was the mission that Challenger was up to?
Well, I should say that I've not been able to do as much research as I'd wish on this, but it included, I think, a communication satellite, and also was planning to observe Halley's Comet.
How much closer, I mean, what would be the effect, how much would we have gained by being that much closer to Halley's Comet? I mean, what would we have learned was new about Halley's Comet from being in the shuttle?
Only by benefit of being above the atmosphere.